Welcome to today's Midvision webcast. Today we're covering automating deployment processes in the WebSphere Application Server. My name's Helen Beale. I head up sales and marketing here at Midvision, and today I'm accompanied by my colleague Dave.
Hi, I'm Dave Sayers. I'm one of the technical directors at Midvision.
So on the agenda today, we're going to be looking first of all at the benefits and challenges around deployment automation, so why people look at these sort of solutions in the first place. Then we're going to think specifically about WebSphere Application Server and the challenges in that area. Dave's then going to start explaining how the RapidDeploy product that we have here is architected, and then specifically talk about what the WebSphere Application Server plugin itself does. And then Dave is going to do a demonstration for you of the plugin, and then we'll talk a little bit about next steps and the trials that we offer here at the end. So first of all, what we see in the marketplace is a maturity scale of the customers. So right at the bottom end, if you like, we have people that are doing everything manually. And the next step up is people are starting to use some scripts. They're starting to recognize that there's ways to accelerate the process of deployment. And then once they start writing scripts, they tend to write more and more scripts. And then after a while, they realize they've got a big bag of scripts, and actually there's some things that they could wrap around all the scripts they have, things like a GUI perhaps, or some integration into some other tools that they have in their business. And they start building their own tool. And then right at the top end of the scale, we talk about a vendor-supported tool like ours, RapidDeploy. And the reason we consider that the ultimate place on the maturity scale is because we have a number of customers worldwide that contribute to our roadmap. So we believe that we have the most innovative solution in the marketplace, and we also provide all the 24/7 global support coverage that you would expect from a vendor, so you don't have to worry about that element of your implementation anymore. So why do people move up this maturity scale? What are they trying to achieve? Well, the manual and the script-based processes can be very time-consuming and quite error-prone. So first of all, people are trying to make productivity improvements. And then what tends to happen as well is there tends to be one or two people perhaps that have built this bunch of scripts that people are using, and they tend to become a bottleneck in the process. They're often viewed as heroes, but often they are slowing down the process because they have too much workload, and ultimately the process is taking too long. So people are looking to do things like self-service to, again, make the process faster and enable more people to contribute. Some of our customers, particularly those actually in the pharmaceutical and healthcare industries, are particularly interested in audit and compliance. So again, when you're using scripts, it becomes very difficult to know who's done what when, and it's quite difficult to roll back to a previously known version. So with a tool, you have a record of everything that has happened, when it happened, and who did it. And it's very easy to redeploy an earlier version, so you effectively roll back to a known good version and get back up and running again. So the other thing that we see, and this slide here is from some research that the analyst Howitz did. So the other thing that we've noticed over the past few years in the market is that there tends to be a compelling event at the moment that drives people forward with automation. So we don't see that many people that are buying automation for automation's sake, but there's often another project that's happening, something like a middleware upgrade, and today we're talking about WebSphere Application Server. So it could be a WAS upgrade, it could be MQ or Message Broker or WebLogic. Or it could be that they are implementing a new core business system, or perhaps they're building a PaaS or a private cloud, or trying to migrate off what we term premium products, so perhaps moving off one of the vendor licensed products like WebSphere onto an open source product like JBoss. There's lots of reasons why people start making those investments, and again, this is from Howitz too. So just to summarize, the benefits and the drivers behind people choosing to implement deployment automation solutions are primarily around productivity. And that's not always about taking resource out of a business. It's often about responding to the business's demand to deliver more innovation and speed time to market. So we talk to a lot of customers whose IT departments feel they really can't keep up with the requirements and demands that their business is making on them. And then the other pieces of it are really around audit and governance and compliance and controlling risk. So I'm going to pass over to Dave at this point, and Dave's going to introduce the architecture behind RapidDeploy for you.
Thanks, Helen. So yeah, so I've got a couple of slides here that I'm going to talk to you, put a bit of context around RapidDeploy, the product itself, how we integrate with other tools in the kind of application lifecycle management process flow, and then I'll spend most of the time looking at the product itself and giving a demo, automating some deployments in WebSphere, and doing a couple of other things. So our product, so it's a deployment automation tool, as Helen said, and it has basically a horizontal aspect, a core application server framework, which is then augmented by different plugins to provide different capabilities. So we have plugins to support different technologies: WebSphere, WebLogic, JBoss, Tomcat, so a whole bunch of different types of app servers. We support deployments, and when I talk about deployments, I'm really talking about not just the deployment of code, but the deployment of anything almost. So we could install a product, we could refer to that as a deployment, or a patch to a product. Deploying configuration changes into targets, so into let's say WebSphere, which is what we're talking about today. But also we might do a deployment to an Oracle database, which is things like deploying DDL changes or those types of things. So we really support in terms of targets. There's three different areas. So there's the app servers I've talked about, databases, Oracle, MySQL, DB2, and then a whole bunch of things in kind of messaging, interoperability areas, MQ, message broker, data power, those types of things. So these are the types of the different target and technology plugins that we support. And then there's some others, and I'll demonstrate some of these today. We have transport plugins, so that's how do we connect to targets, with SSH or agent, whatever, those types of things. We integrate with cloud providers, so things like AWS and OpenStack. So this is, again, if we're trying to link our application deployment into some kind of provisioning or cloud, PaaS platform. And then the tool chain plugins here are really referring to how we integrate with other tools in our DevOps tool chain, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So Subversion, Jenkins, those types of things. And then we have some BI plugins for reporting and MI. So this is kind of just building on kind of trying to display how the product architecture works a little bit more. So in the core framework server itself, we have the core functions that we're providing, so job scheduling, tasks, orchestration, and the ability to install and patch components. And then on the right, we're augmenting that with the different plugins, as I was talking about on the previous screen. And then this is a kind of a slide trying to show really, one is that the different actors or users that we have within the ALM release cycle. So what, and I guess Midvision, and this is a kind of this is an approach that many vendors have taken. It obviously makes sense that we've got different users that have different use cases through the release life cycle. So we have developers that might want to develop and release EAR files and more files in the development environment. In our test environment, we've potentially got testers that want to run that either want to deploy versions into test environments. They might want to approve versions into test environments. They might want to run things like Selenium scripts or whatever, but they're going to have a different interface or a different view of our infrastructure. And then sysadmins might be the guys that they're going to configure the targets, they're going to set the security, they're going to define everything, but perhaps allowing the other actors like developers or other users, project managers, they might be saying, well, we can define what a target looks like, but I'm going to allow my development team to deploy to it in a self-service aspect. And again, we have views from an operations and management perspective for things like MI, approval processes, etc. And with the different actors, they each have, in effect, different capabilities and maybe different security contexts to allow them to perform the operations that are applicable to them in the different environments. But the common but we've got a common, tooling and process that's allowing us to let all of our users perform the things that they want using the same tooling, but in different contexts for different environments. And then this is a kind of, let's try to illustrate this kind of an architectural view of where Midvision sits, and it talks a little bit about the tools that we integrate with in the DevOps, what I think is becoming a standard pattern actually for a DevOps tool chain, or it's just particularly related to the release aspect of the kind of application lifecycle management. So in the kind of core of the middle of this diagram here, we've got this ARA box, and this is where I put RapidDeploy in here, and in the kind of, let's say, the more sort of open source or different other tools in this space, so tools like Puppet and Chef. So this is the application release automation component. And then the way RapidDeploy works, and again, as I say, this is actually, I would say, a standard pattern that other vendors have implemented as well. Vendors from IBM and BMC and others. So this is I'd say this is how we've based our tool, but there are others that have based their architectures, on the same principles. So the ARA tool's in the middle. This is where we're defining our automation. This is what we're going to look at today. And then when we create any configuration in here, this is almost like our IDE. If you think about how developers use Eclipse, and they're going to write some code in Eclipse, and then they're going to store that in Subversion or Git or ClearCase, whatever it is. And that's what we do. We use our web-based tool, or what web is one of the interfaces to that. It could be Eclipse as well, and command line, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But we're going to write out our infrastructure definitions to the source control system. And then when we want to create an artifact, whether that's a code artifact, so a war file, where if we want to release a war or an ear or something of that, which is a derived object, an actual application, or whether we want to create a version of configuration. So we're going to say, I'm going to deploy some config, a cluster, and some data sources to my WebSphere environment. In either case, we would suggest that this is stored in a source control system, and then we use a build system to create a version of those artifacts that we're deploying, whether it's code or config, whatever that is. This is what we believe provides the richest capability for audit and promotion and other features that we'll talk through when we do the demo. So RapidDeploy can connect through to build systems like Jenkins and Cruise Control and RTC via different protocols like JMX, for example, in order to invoke a build. And then the final part of this the final part that I really want to talk about really is the concept of using a DSL. So, and this is there's a couple of different meanings for DSL, and in this one I'm referring to it as a definitive software library. So this is using something like Nexus Sonatype or Artifactory or Rational Asset Manager, and this is where we're storing our derived objects. So our build system is going to take our source control out of source control or our configuration, create a package, and then put that into a DSL. And then our deployment tool can pick it up from the DSL and push that out to the target. Now, I should say that we support this architecture, and then when we look at the product shortly, that you don't need to plug into any of these tools for this to work, right? So you don't, in the same way, you don't need, when you're writing Java code, you don't need to put it in source control, or you don't need Jenkins to build it, or you don't need Artifactory to store it. You know, you can just do everything locally if you wanted, right? And we can do the same stuff here with our tooling. And again, I'd say this is common across, you know, the vendor tooling in this space. You know, that this is starting to become a common pattern where we're basically taking some of the best practices from the development world and applying them to our automation definitions that allow us to manage our operations and infrastructure environment with this kind of approach that's familiar to developers but perhaps less familiar to operations. So it's really using the types of tools that you have in development to give advanced, you know, audit and reporting and versioning, but applying that to our infrastructure environments. And I'll show you a little bit about how that looks in the product demo. And then really what we're trying to do is to create, you know, a pipeline of change, a fast flow of change from development through to our production environments, and then through the different environments along the way. So, you know, many, you know, organizations are going to have development and QA and pre-production and performance tests, and, you know, so, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a mechanism where the release process itself is automated. So whether that's deploying a WAR or an EAR file or whatever it is in WebSphere, or whether it's deploying the, you know, some code with its dependencies, your data sources, a new cluster, a virtual host. So we can package all of these things together, and then we want to be able to flow that through from through each of our environments. And then on the way, and this is I would say a kind of, you know, like, let's say, a DevOps principle that we've used in our tool design for from the beginning is that we're testing the release in every environment, right? So that's what I think. In most organizations are very familiar with the idea of saying, well, we've got version 100 of, you know, the call center application, right, which is a WAR file or an EAR file, and then we're going to test that in each of our environments through to production. But what we're saying is we have a version of our process and our configuration that we're also testing in each environment. So as we get nearer to the production release, we've actually validated in potentially, you know, potentially dozens or hundreds of times, depending on how many releases we've done, that the actual process works. So we're not only testing the code, we're testing the process, and we're using the same process in each of the environments. And I'll talk a little bit about how we achieve that. And again, we're not, you know, unique in taking this approach of having like a data-driven approach to automation, whereby we're using the same automation in every environment, and then we basically just, you know, inject the different variables that constitute the difference between the environments. And then, so the core of some of what I'm going to talk about today, and really what we're talking about from a WebSphere perspective, is the ability to, with the tools, to be able to install the products and patch them and create domains and cells and those types of things, and secure it. So we've got the ability within the tool to do that. And then, but really what I'm going to talk about today is, and I'll talk specifically about the use case demos in a minute, but it's around the sort of configuration aspect of it and deployments. And then one of the last use cases that we provide in WebSphere that I'm going to talk a little bit about is snapshotting an environment. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about what that means. And so in terms of the actual demo, what I'm going to cover is I'm going to provide you with an initial view of what we call task orchestration. So this is how we organize our automation within, you know, we're looking at WebSphere today, so how we organize that for WebSphere. So we're going to say, we're going to create an orchestration that's going to perform a certain set of actions. So to create a cluster and deploy an app and do a bunch of other things. I'm going to talk about orchestration. I'm going to talk in a demo about how we integrate with the other ALM tools or DevOps tool chains a little bit. And then we'll talk about, I'm actually going to give an example. We're going to deploy some configuration, a cluster, some data sources, virtual host, a bunch of stuff, and an application out to a WebSphere environment. And then I'm going to talk, the last two aspects then is the first thing I want to talk about how we do what we call logical cloning of an environment. So what I can do is I can create a unit of work, which is a bunch of activities, right? So create a cluster or, a virtual host and a whole bunch of stuff, maybe some JMS configurations, deploy an app and into, let's say, my Dev 01 environment, and then how do I promote that into my system test 01, or how do I create a system test 02 environment from that? And it's cloning that we use to create and promote configurations. And then finally, I'm going to talk about what we call snapshot, and that's basically, it's almost like a reverse, well, there's two use cases for it really. One is looking at almost like reversing the automation process. So when we've got a brownfield environment, we've got a WebSphere environment that exists, how do we pull some of that config back into the tool to potentially push it out again or bring it under configuration management? And also, there's a lot of use here for audit and what we call the discovery purposes. So I can point the tool at a WebSphere environment, import the configuration, and basically create a baseline, a line in the sand that says, my environment works. And then let's say I want to compare that to, I want to compare my configuration in my WebSphere cell or cluster today with last week. I'd say a common use case in an operations environment or from an infrastructure team is, we've got a problem in our WebSphere environment or my application's not working. And what we can do is we can use the compare facility either something has changed or that something hasn't changed, and on both we'll look at that example. But actually, being able to identify that things have changed or haven't changed is powerful in both cases. Okay, so I'm going to now jump out the PowerPoint and then come to my demo. So we've got we've got a few different interfaces to the tool in order to, which allows us to configure our automation and execute the automation. Now we have a web-based interface here, which is the most commonly used, and we also have a command line and then a REST web services, and then we can also, which I'll look at in a moment, access some of the configuration and automation definitions from Eclipse as well. But in the first instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a WebSphere automation project, and we'll look at some of the steps in there. So under the resources projects menu, if I select that, I can see some projects, and I should say that there's there's a security context around here, so I can log into, when I log into the application, I can use either the security that comes with the application, or I can plug that into Active Directory or LDAP, and then we have a structure of users and groups and roles that allow us to define what different actors in our environment, in our organization, what use cases and things they can actually perform. And the project also has a security context. So these are all the projects that I'm allowed to actually view. So I'm going to look at, we'll talk a little bit about WebSphere 7 and WebSphere 8 through the demo, but I'm going to look at, in the first instance, this WebSphere 7 project. And then I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about what the project is. How a project's actually structured. So the project is really a logical unit of automation that we provide. So this is really, it's most likely to be related to a technology and a business application. So this could be my online banking WebSphere application, or my telephony JBoss app, whatever. So it's more likely to be related to that. And then I'll talk a little bit later about how we can bundle multiple technologies into a single release. But we would normally organize one technology related to one business application as a project. Now on this first screen we've got some metadata, what the project's called, etc. But what I really want to show you here is on this second screen is what we call a task orchestration, and this is where we're orchestrating the activities that we want to happen in every single environment, right? So for everywhere I deploy this particular WebSphere application, from my development, QA, staging, production, this is a model for my orchestration that we're looking at here. So these are the different steps that we're going to go through, and then if I click on any of these steps, then I see some parameters that on the right hand side here, some arguments that each of these tasks take, and then we're going to be using different variables in each of the environments that we deploy to. Dev will be different to production, and we also handle things that, like in development we have one server, and in production we have 64 nodes, and in passwords are different in one. It's stored in one way. Developers can access them and change them, and in production they're handled in a completely different way. So I'll talk to you a little bit about how we do that. But these are the high-level steps that create what we call a model for this deployment. And then at the bottom here, there's a whole bunch of ones at the top: copying some files, exploding some EAR files. We're going to do some search and replace inside an EAR and a WAR file. We're going to update some XML files using XPath. Then we're going to touch some files inside the EAR in case we're doing a rollback. So any JSPs or whatever would be refreshed in the browser. Right? This is what we've designed this particular release. And then on the WebSphere deployment task, I'm going to look at in more detail in a moment. But we've just got one task defined. And I'll show you, there's another screen where we actually define what the actual separate steps within WebSphere are, and then we're going to perform all of those steps in a transactional manner. So I've only got one step here, and I'll show you the other screen in a moment, which allows us to define what constitutes what's going to be done on this particular WebSphere step. As one unit of work. So I could have 2 or 3 WebSphere steps, and one might be transactionally, configure cell security and create some other config, some users or groups or whatever we wanted to do in WebSphere, and then I could have another one which said, deploy some configuration changes, create a cluster, some virtual hosts, and another one to do that. But in this case, I've just got one, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to transactionally do a whole bunch of things as a single unit of work. So that's the kind of, just a quick overview. We've got a palette here of different actions on the left, and then so if I wanted to orchestrate different actions here, I can do a whole bunch of things that are either related to specific technologies, or more generic actions here. So I could, for example, in my automation, I could say, create a user or group, or check a group exists, check I've got 2 gig of file system available, change ownership of something. I've got a whole bunch of different things that I could do. I could run my own script that I have written myself. There's a whole bunch of other things. Or if I was, let's say, doing some stuff within WebSphere, if I click on here, this is the binary install view. I can, create profiles and, do backups of tasks and use a manage profile task to create some configurations or update NIF or whatever it is that I want to do. There's a whole bunch of things in here that I can do, and then I just drag and drop them from the left and pull them over. So if I want to add a new task, I can just click on this change directory task and pull that over, and then that updates the orchestration itself. Okay, so the other thing I want to talk about, so that's task orchestration and how we orchestrate the actual tasks, and then we'll look in a moment about how we look at the specifics of the steps for the WebSphere deployment and automation that we need to carry out. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about these other tabs that are on this project. So if I click on the SCM repository tab, in here what I've got is that this project is configured to use Subversion, and then basically any changes I make, and we're going to make some changes in a moment, or any configuration definitions I create are automatically going to be written to Subversion for me. So in the same way a developer would use Eclipse and check files in and out, and then we've got a complete audit history of versions of everything that we do stored in Eclipse, and we support ClearCase and Git and a whole bunch of others, and then that I can select the different ones from this list here on the right, and you'll see that throughout the tool, I mentioned before that we had this plugin manager concept, and if we get a chance, I'll show you that. But basically, I can install different plugins for different types of technology. So I've got the Rational Team Concert plugin installed and the ClearCase and Subversion one, but I don't have one for Git installed as an example. But if I installed it from the plugin manager, then I would see it in this. And if I change that to show RTC instead of Subversion, then it would show me the particular values that I need to put in for Subversion. And then this next tab is called the Artifact Repository, and that allows us to pick up the artifacts, or configure where the artifacts are stored that we want to deploy. So that's EAR files or WAR files, or whether it's packages of configuration. That we're always going to be deploying, and pushing out change of some type, and it's where we pick that up from. Now, it can either be a file system, which is what we've got here, or I could pick it up from a Maven-based repository, so Maven or Artifactory or Nexus, Sonatype, Rational Asset Manager, those types of things, and they're DSLs, and then we can pick up the things that we want to deploy from a DSL if we've got one plugged in. I can also build my application before I deploy it, so I can do the build and deploy in a single unit. And I should say that the way that so we can from RapidDeploy, if I wanted to point to, let's say, Jenkins to do a build of a particular project, then I could configure in here some values for Jenkins, and it would connect via JMX, build the app, and then I can deploy it. Or the other thing that you can do is that you can deploy from your build tool as well. So if you build in Jenkins, then as an example, then you can configure your build to automatically deploy once it's built, and we provide plugins for several build tools like Jenkins, where you can actually configure it within Jenkins to just automatically kick off a deploy. And then, but the way we've designed the tool is that you can actually do that really from anywhere, right? So you could do it from any type of system via a REST Web Services API call. Okay, so I'm going to whiz on. I'm slightly mindful of time. There's some other things on here about what the type of project this is and some stuff around security. Okay, but what I want to do is I definitely want to make sure we have plenty of time to cover the WebSphere aspect of it. So what I'm going to do firstly is I want to kick off a deployment. I'm going to look at this WebSphere 7 project initially, and then I'm going to go to my WebSphere 7 deploy demo project. And then I've got a number of targets defined. So I've got a deployment manager server, a cell, a cluster, and an app here. And then when I select this application, it puts it across onto the right-hand side. And I could select multiple applications at one time if I wanted. So I could, and they might be different ones. So I could say I'm going to deploy a WebSphere app with some config. I'm going to deploy something to my database and something to MQ. And then I'd select them on the left-hand side, and I could choose different projects from here if I wanted in order to build up the list of things that I want to deploy. But in this case, I'm just going to use one. I'm going to deploy one app, and then on here I can select a version that I want to deploy. So I'm going to use version 8 here, and then go through the rest of the wizard and put in some the configuration that's required. Now, there's quite a lot of different controls that we can do on our deployment. So I can do things like organize my deployment so that I have some production category types and some release types, so I can promote from one type of environment to another. And then I can do things like pick up latest configuration from source control, but I'm not going to talk too much about that today. And so, but on this screen, really, all today, I'm only going to change the version, and I'm going to click on Next. Now, when I click on Next here, this is actually said I can't go any further because it's put this warning up, say late properties remain to be configured. So if I click on this button here, what we've done for this application is configured what we call late property injection. And what that's saying is that this release requires the user to input some data at release time before the deployment can happen. So in this case, what we're saying is that we need to put a password into the deployment to drive the automation that we're not storing anywhere, right? So the reason why we really put this in is that we'd say we had organizations that were saying to us, when we, let's say, well, our administrators, for example, in a WebSphere environment, they're not allowed to know the passwords for our production databases. So the WebSphere team or the RapidDeploy administration team will configure the automation, and then a security team can then do the release, and then they would need to put in the passwords, and you saw that field, it was encrypted, and this only remains in memory. And then we're going to go through and pass that in as a value to our automation. And then I've got a bunch of other different things that I can do here, whether if I batch them, whether if a deployment fails, I go on to the next one. I can do things like schedule a release to happen at a particular time. I can say how long a release should take, and so if it doesn't complete in a certain time, then I want to back it out as an example. So there's a whole bunch of different things I can do, and I should say that on this wizard at any point I can click skip to finish, and then that will bring me straight to the end. And then on the next screen here we've got this concept of doing a snapshot. I'm going to talk about snapshots. So now that we've done that, we've basically been through the wizard, we've selected a target environment, a version, and I'm going to kick off the automation itself. And then what that's going to do is it's going to take the package from our repository, push it to our target server, and then it's going to unzip it, and then it's going to go through and create a bunch and perform a bunch of different automation actions. So on the task orchestration before, the steps that we had configured, so it was copying some files, expanding an EAR file, doing a search and replace, and XPath, and then doing some transactional WebSphere stuff. It's going through and it's doing those things now. And we can see the high-level tasks at the top and their status, and then at the bottom, we can see the details of what's actually happening. And then we can see the WebSphere deployment step has started. And then you can see, I don't know if you can, how clearly you can see this, but it's saying enter in queue, and then it's exited a queue straight away. So if there's multiple people deploying to the same deployment manager at the same time, it would queue them and only allow one to happen at any particular time. And then it's connecting to the WebSphere deployment manager using a SOAP connection, and it's going to go through, and the automation package that we've got here, we have two different types that we can use. One that's based on, that's driven by WS admin, and we'll look at how that's configured in a moment. And then we can also, we also have a JMX interface as well, which so the package, the automation can be based on either. And then now what it's doing is it's going through and it's checked that the node agents are online. It's going to do a bunch of configuration actions. So it's checking whether this demo cluster exists and whether a virtual host exists. And and the first time I do a deploy, what it does is it says, does my demo 01 cluster exist, right? So if I look on here under my app servers, then hopefully if I'm quick enough before the deployment finishes, I'll see that I don't have any app servers in here, or there's no clusters. And then the package contains the automation to do that, right? And there's no applications. So I've got a bunch of configuration in here that actually there was an app there which actually it looks like it's persisted it. So we can see, whilst I wasn't quite quick enough there, and we can see it's actually installed that application and it's saving it now. So and I'm going to go back in a moment and just explain to you how we created that automation package within the tool in order to push out this particular automation within WebSphere. So this is the steps that it's going through, and whilst that's just finishing up, it's saving and syncing. There's a couple of things that I want to show you quickly. So one is that if under this configuration edit promote screen, this is where we define what the automation we're going to perform in WebSphere is. So if I go to my WebSphere 7 deploy project, and that's stored in Subversion. So all of these configurations are in Subversion, and they're automatically being written out. And then I create new environment. This is how I created the definition here that we're using. Is what I did is I used a template. So we provide these templates. So for one's for WebSphere 7, or I could choose a WebSphere 8. Choose a WebSphere 8 cluster template as an example. And then this template here requires me to put in a bunch of configuration. So what's the cell called that's deployed to? What's the cluster name? Things like timeouts. I can have booleans and drop downs and various things. And these screens, we can control what's in these screens. So this is just an XML document, and then it allows me to put in different values for different types of configuration, ports and heaps and whatever else. And then, so we can control in our particular environment what type of templates we have and what we expose to the user. And then when we save that, we configure these values, then it will write that back to source control. And then the difference is that between doing that in here and doing it in here, for example, so if I come back into my WebSphere environment, so onto my WebSphere admin console, so now I can see my demo cluster 01 has been created, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's associated with this. So I've got an app server, I've got a cluster, I've got an app that's been deployed, I've got a virtual host, I've got some data sources, and that's all been defined using these templates from the tool, and then they're actually written out as property files into our source control system. So if I come into Eclipse here, then what I've done is I've codified, and this is you'll hear people like you know, Puppet Labs and Opscode talk about infrastructure as code, and this, in a way, this is what we're doing here. We've created a definition for environment, and we've written it to a source control system, and then we've codified how the infrastructure looks. So in here, I've got all of my values of what ports and system properties and what, and I can update all of these if I choose. I can put literals in, or I can put you know, I could say I always want to use this Oracle driver definition for every environment, and then for other values, I'm going to say I want to put in a particular, I want it to be a variable. So if I come down, you know, if I come down to, if I look for anything that has an at sign in it, these are all variables, right? So this server name of where I'm going to install my app to varies in each environment. Okay, so I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Another thing that I want to do, so I've basically deployed my configuration out to WebSphere, and there's a couple more things that I want to cover. So one is that I'm going to do what we call a snapshot of an environment. So this is to import the configuration back into the tool. And what I'm going to do is I've got my WebSphere demo cluster 01 environment. I'm going to click on snapshot, and then I can schedule snapshots, so I can have a snapshot happen every day or every week. And I'm going to kick that off now. And this is going to go to the WebSphere server. Now that I've pushed out some automation and created some stuff, it's going to pull it back into RapidDeploy. So it connects via JMX, and then it's going to iterate through and pull in all of the configuration back into the tool itself. And if I go on to jobs, executing jobs, I should see that running. It takes a couple of minutes. There's quite a lot of data that it needs to pull back. And then if I look and click on that, I can see the status of this particular job. So it's pulling all of this data back from WebSphere. Now, whilst that's running, what I'm going to do, so what I've done so far, I've talked a little bit about, we've pushed out an automation package, which has created some automation, which has created some configuration, deployed an app in WebSphere. I talked to you a little bit about how we created the content using a template in the first place, but what I want to show you here is how once I've created my template, and if I'm honest with you, this is where the work is. And this is the same with any tool, I would say, right? So we like, for example, integrate with Chef and do a lot of Chef automation as well. And so with any of these tools, really, or we integrate with the National Automation Framework, and we've worked with that as well. The legwork is defining the automation in the first place, right? Now that's where we say that's where the hard work is about saying we've got a cluster, a virtual host, port, system properties, you know, all of this stuff, right? What the drivers are, everything else. And then, but what we want to be able to do is once we've done all of that work once, we want to be able to create a second version of the environment quickly. So what I'm going to do here is show you how we do that. So I've got my demo 01 environment, and then what I'm going to do is into the same cell, I'm going to create another one called demo 2, right? So into my exact same WebSphere cell. Now, I could move it to another cell simply by putting in some values in here, right? And I can also deploy the same app between WebSphere 7. I can deploy it from WebSphere 7 to 8 or 8.5 as well, right? So we can do, the automation can deploy to different versions, even the same application. But I'm just going to go quickly to call that version 2. I'm going to keep it in the same project, my WebSphere 7 deploy project. And then I've got this concept on this screen called data dictionaries. Now this is saying that these are the values that I want to change in each of my environments, right? So I'm going to call my application 02, I'm going to call the cluster demo 2, and then I'm going to use everything else the same cell, the same host name. And then in fact what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to, let's say I'm going to save my password in here. So I don't need to do a late property injection on that. So I'm going to add that in here so it's persisted, and that will write out to disk an encrypted way. So it's still, let's say, consider that to be reasonably secure, but this time I'm actually going to persist that, and then I'm going to create that environment definition. Now, so there's a couple of things that I want to do. So if I come into here, what I'm going to show you here is how this stuff looks in Eclipse. Now, I mentioned a minute ago we've got this. We have forms to create automation definitions quite simply in the first place, and then but underneath all of that, it's all writing everything out really just as files. So we've got this. This is the file that we use the form to create to define what the WebSphere environment looks like. So we've got a server name, a node. These are all variables here, and then we're saying for every environment we deploy to, the thread pool minimum and the thread pool maximum is going to be the same, right? 10 and 50, you know, and then we can control what people can change. It's only these things that we call data dictionaries that we want people to change. So if you look at all of the configuration in this, to configure this WebSphere environment, there's pages of it, right? There's system properties, time zone configurations, what the log settings are. You know, there's a whole bunch of JMS config in here. There's class path settings. Now, most of it we absolutely want to be the same in every environment, and only some of it do we want to change in our different environments. And then, so when I've created the definition, it automatically writes it to the source control, and every time I update it, it's going to check it in and out for me. Right, so and then so I've got that configuration in here. Now, if I go back to my web application here, now I can see that it's just created that demo 02 cluster. And then if I come back into my source control, I'm going to update to head as if I was a developer. This is it, and now I see the second definition in here, and that's been automatically written back. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to deploy that out again to my runtime. But before I do that, there's just a couple more. There's one more thing I want to do. So I'm going to check on my jobs, previous jobs, that my snapshot is completed. And then before I do that, what I want to do is I want to show you how this is like a super powerful audit capability. What I did with that snapshot was pull back in all of the definitions for this cluster, right? And I can snapshot a cell scope or anything else. Now let's go into here, and I'm going to change. This is one of the things I set in my automation. Let's change that definition to 66, and maybe change my log path or something, right? So I'm going to change. I could change anything in here. In fact, I'll make that 16:53, which is the time in London, and then I'm going to OK that, save it, and then that's been saved to WebSphere. So I've manually made a change to my environment, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back into RapidDeploy, and I'm going to snapshot that environment again. Right. So the objective of this, what I'm trying to illustrate to you, is that we pushed out some automation, and we created a line in the sand, and so we pushed it out and we configured our environment, and we said, yeah, it works now. I snapshotted that environment, and now what I'm trying to do is demonstrate if someone steps out of the process and makes a manual change to that runtime, we can identify the specific change that's happened, and any change within WebSphere, we will get it. So, so that's going to snapshot now, and then once that's completed, I'm going to go ahead and do a new deployment. So if I look on the executing jobs, we should see that that job is running, and that's going to take that might take a minute or two. So whilst we do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our project where we created our new environment, the demo 02 environment, and then I'm going to kick off a deployment to that WebSphere the newly configured WebSphere environment. So I'll go back to this demo project, and we've got this second environment. So what I'm going to do before I deploy it, I'm going to create a new package. So package 8 is what we deployed previously. I'm going to create a new one because I've got a new configuration definition, which is package 9. Click on create, and then that's going to create that in my repository. So it's created package 9, and then I can go ahead and deploy that release out to my target system. So now here, when I click on these quick links at the side, I can see that there's a demo 2 or a dem 2 target to deploy to. And then I'm going to go through, and I can see automatically here it defaults to release 9. I could change that to a previous release. And then this time I'm going to skip to the finish, and then I'm going to execute this job, which will then push the package out to the remote system, and then it's going to go through the same steps as we did on the first set of automation, but this time, because I've tokenized everything, it's going to create a cluster called Demo2, deploy an app called Demo2, create an app server which is unique. All of the ports are unique. I've got a virtual host which has all been mapped with the right ports. So the work was in creating these templates initially, in doing this, we use forms, we store them like this, but to create a subsequent environment, to deploy it to a new cell, to deploy it between versions, it's super quick, right? And as I've just kind of, shown you here. So I think we're kind of, I might, if we get time, this is going to take a couple of minutes to deploy. I'm running a little bit behind schedule, so what I'm going to do is just quickly wrap up, just to summarize what we've talked about here. So in terms of the principles that I've talked about using the kind of deployment automation process to WebSphere is that we're versioning both the code and configuration of our runtime environment. So and this is, I think this is, people are going to see this not just from us but from other vendors, and this I think will become an industry standard of having very good configuration management for infrastructure. So that was one of the things hopefully that came out today. And then the automation itself is a composite release of automation. So when we deploy it, if the things like the clusters and data sources and other things that are in the package don't exist, they'll be created. The next time we do a deployment, it doesn't create them again because they exist, but it says, does my demo 01 cluster exist? Second time it says, yes, it does. And then it validates that everything's correct. Are the ports right? Are the logs right? Everything else, it'll update them if they're not. So that's the kind of key part of that. And then the ability to encapsulate all of our code and configuration into packages allows us to introduce change in that way and also roll back or revert change in that way. So we can deploy release 100, which will do a bunch of stuff. If we don't like it, we'll go back to release 99. Right? We have all of that in our build system and our source control system, and then we can just redeploy that, and it's going to undo the port changes or reset the heap size or whatever changes we've made in one package. It's going to do it in the previous one. And then we talked a little bit about cloning environments. So this helps us. We can use that for rebuilding environments, for moving things to another cell. We can use it from going from WebSphere 7 to 8.5. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we can do. And then we talked about comparing environments a little bit. So we compared. We did 2 snapshots, and if we have, I think we're coming up to the time, but I'd probably like to just very quickly show you that, how we can compare 2 environments, and then we've got the ability to do audit of what actions happened in what environment. So the last thing, and then we're coming up to the top of the hour here, so we might run over it by a minute or two if we want questions, is the environment comparison, and I'll just do that and see if we've got any questions. Oh, yeah, and of course we're not going to record questions, so I'm going to show you the environment comparison facility. So that's showing you here on these snapshots. You can see the whole. There's like 2,600 lines of configuration that WebSphere is exposing, and my comparison has just shown me the change that's been made, right? So it's saying that this line of config has changed here. It was 44, and then now we changed that to whatever it was. So we changed the log size to 66, whatever it was. I think I'm seeing the right change. So this is the comparison feature within within the tool. So it's just showing me that this particular line related to the logging has changed. And then I just want to check that other job has finished. Yeah, so that job's finished. And then so the very last thing to show you before we time out is that we've created our demo cluster 02, and that started. And it's got the app server, it's got the cluster definition, and then it's uniquely defined all of the ports and everything else in here. And that was, so we created a template, and then we can create new environments very, very easily. And that encapsulated all of the changes that we defined in our template. And then we just had the wizard, which allows us to drive the differences between the environments that we wanted. Okay, so on that, I think we're going to finish the demo. And
thanks very much, Dave. So yeah, that was your presentation and demonstration today about automating the deployment processes in WebSphere Application Server. If you'd like to know more, we do offer free trials. So if you email me, my email address is there in front of you. We will send you over some instructions on where to download the code and the license key and get you started. So thank you very much, everybody, for your attention.